the original concept for this episode was just us forcing Yankee to read the entire gag article and make fun of him as he progressed and watch him slowly lose his mind. Unfortunately,
which we will do.
Yeah, unfortunately, Yankee's gone ahead and read it ahead of time for this episode and done some research behind it. But I think we should just let him go through the thing and like be our Charon, guiding us through the depths of the underworld.
That's a high...
That was very poetic.
You're letting me way too much credit for this because I've done research on this. I have read the source book that this is based on, Sadie Plant Zeros and Ones. I've read this thing cover to cover. I've taken notes, not copious notes. I've taken notes only on the computer science stuff, which I had no clue was going on because I'm not a total nerd and I get out of the house every once in a while, so I don't know what a kernel is. I didn't know what the Unix operating system was. Yeah, I don't have Linux. I don't spend my days watching Linux videos.
Dude, some of those channels are epic. Those channels are epic. I don't even have Linux, bro.
Yeah. But, I guess, Og, do you want to start off? Because the main topic that we're talking about today is gender accelerationism. And around this one article that kind of explains some tenets of it. But do you want to give a broader definition of accelerationism and some of the other camps within the movement?
Well, basically, it all spawns out of this one guy, Nick Land, who was a very strange philosopher that had his like real time in the sun around the 1990s and early 2000s. He is coming out of the tradition of Deleuze, Guattari, and I think a guy named Lyotard as well as Nietzsche and Kant, obviously. Just strange, cybernetic, weird cyberpunk philosophy, basically, of total deterritorialization, capital as like a living creature. A whole bunch of very, very strange philosophical concepts that requires a ton of background in stuff that I just don't have it in. Also, fundamentally, though, what it comes down to is capitalism and capital itself and efficiency itself is like slowly destroying what it means to be a human being. That the only way out through this predicament is through it. And so you just embrace becoming like the cyborg post-human machine thing, come out on the other end as like a superior being, and deliver paradise on Earth, basically, as far as I understand it, or at least like deliver us from these petty human shackles. And that was his message during the 90s, where he was with a cybernetic cultural research unit, which was at his university in Warwick. In England. There he got along with a bunch of other quote-unquote accelerationist philosophers like Sadie Plant, who this author was inspired by, the author of the article we're going to be reading today. After his time at the CCRU, at some point he moves to China because he's there right now. I don't know the story behind that, but it's just a little tidbit. And he eventually becomes part of NRX, the neo-reactionary movement, dialoguing with Goldbug and a bunch of other people in the NRX movement.
Who else would put in that camp?
Exactly.
Because also, just for reference, if anyone wants a good few hours to spend on land, go to Meta Nomad's podcast, Hermetix. We don't need him to shill his stuff because he already does a good enough job on his own of getting the word out there and putting out good quality content. It's sort of how I had my philosophical awakening, was by watching Hermetix podcasts. Very good job. I think he actually, not only did he write a book on the philosophy of Nick Land, he also interviewed Nick Land a few years back. And Nick Land, when you hear him speak, he's just as schizophrenic as you would think he is. When he talks, he definitely sounds like he's stared into the abyss and he's become consumed by it. And that's pretty much it from what I remember. It's been a few years since I watched him. But another key facet is, at least within acceleration, is the multiple subunits. Like things like zero accelerationism, which is abbreviated as ZAC, gender acceleration, which we're talking about, which is called GAC. There's LAC, there's RAC, which are left and right accelerationists. So it's accelerationism with a political tinge to it. But that's as far as I know. I don't know if there's any more.
I think where the breakdowns come in is like where the emphasis on like the post-human future, or like the basically like the capital -ist with like capital C capital is going to look like and how to get there. And the breakdowns, the first one that happened, I think, if I recall correctly, was left and right, and they broke down over whether like capital was like human friendly or not, and whether it was and whether accelerationism's purpose was to deliver basically luxury space communism, the way that most people on the left wanted it to be like, and the people on the right side of accelerationism, it's only called that as to distinguish it from the left side, because there's nothing like traditionally right wing about this position. It's basically that the transformation, like the move into the future, won't be like, you know, all nice human beings get to live in pleasure domes forever. It's more like you will be, or humanity will be totally deterritorialized and abused and transformed by machinery until we're no longer human anymore. And that would constitute a quote unquote good thing, although I think that term becomes pretty meaningless once you get into this territory. After that, you get another division called UAC, undivided accelerationism, which its only emphasis is on getting capital and technology up until the point that we were talking about before. Right-wing accelerationism, or RAC, is concerned with like it's concerned that humanity won't be able to get to that point before capital fails, and like basically the entirety of the human project, humanity's purpose, will have failed. UAC doesn't believe this is necessarily the case. RAC is concerned that it might be the case. ZAC, zero accelerationism, is concerned that this will definitely be the case, and that every single attempt at futurity or like efficiency or like growth or progress eventually collapses back into the black hole of zero-ness, I guess. That's Metanomad's whole thing. If I think correctly, he's the one who came up with that. So if you wanted to look more into that, look into him basically. And then we have the little remainder meme accelerationism called Gender Accelerationism, which doesn't give a shit about any of those other like practical problems, and is only concerned on like acceleration's impact on gender, or how gender might be related to the accelerated future.
Yeah, and
that's what we're going to tackle here today.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, just two notes. One, if you want some other books on just these ideas of capitalism and this postmodern capitalism, one that gets thrown around at least in Twitter threads and in intellectual circles a lot, is Mark Fisher. His book Capitalist Realism: Is There No Alternative? And I've read it. It's decent, and it's pretty much an elaboration on some of the post-Marxist Frankfurt School ideas of capital. Like, if you've read things like The Mass Ornament, or maybe some stuff by Adorno, or maybe like something like The Culture Industry, you'll understand some of the points and the ideas of Fordism and neoliberal markets, and the idea that it's easier to imagine an end to the world than an end to capitalism. and the ever-consuming nature of capital. These have been ideas that have been around forever. I think Fisher does a good job of condensing it in 80 pages, so you don't have to just read like 20 Zizek books where he just talks about the Hegelian dialectic for 10 of them. And which, I mean, no one should ever have to talk about the Hegelian dialectic except when proving why it's wrong. But, second note, what was my second note? I don't even know what my second note was going to be. Probably didn't even matter anyways. It was probably just going to be something about Yak. Actually, just remembered it. It was about gender. Gender. At least with Yak, it's very influenced not just by critical theory. It's very much influenced by just feminism in general. And you can trace it probably all the way back to things like Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex and a bunch of other feminist manifestos, because at one point this feminism is concerned about the woman, and now we've reached a point, at least in the discussion of gender accelerationism, where we're going beyond the woman. And the last part of this essay is called Aphotic Feminism, which we'll get into later.
Okay, so it sounds like we're ready to just dive into it.
I got something really quick.
Yeah.
This is like the first time I talked the entire time, so
Please.
I don't know if you guys saw it. It was there's like a movie script where like a bunch of random people, I think they were like in the cybernetic research unit or whatever. They're like, oh, we need to find him, and they go to Shanghai, and they go to this like dirty apartment complex.
Oh,
and
I remember this.
They tear out Nick Land. He's like stuck on like some Linux computer or something.
Mold bugs in the room. I forget who else was in the room.
It's
Zero
so
HP
funny.
Lovecraft. It's so funny.
It would literally be like, if I had an infinite amount of money to
money.
make a movie, I would make that movie. It would be so amazing.
Aside from the Berserker Bridge that this will happen eventually.
This is never
Aside
happening.
from the Berserker Bridge, we will sponsor this cockpit of whatever. We'll just call it an art project, because you can't even call it a film. It's just art.
It is. It has transcended the film genre. I think it reaches levels of divine inspiration. The more I think about it.
Accelerated past
It
film
does.
and the need for eyes.
It's media accelerationism. You can only experience it with all 7 of your senses.
It's Mac.
Yes.
Movie accelerationism.
Yeah. All right. So I guess I'll start a little bit. Also, do you know who Nyx is? The author of this.
Nyx is
Twitter persona, right?
Yeah, it's a Twitter persona. It's a Twitter user, basically, that I've seen a couple times go on a few live streams. One with what's his name? Justin Murphy. That was the only one. It's the only time I've seen them take a live stream. But they're basically a blogger / Twitter user, and they get invited to do interviews sometimes.
Yeah. But also, if anyone, we'll put the link if anyone else wants to read it and suffer with me.
I do know for a fact that they are trans, which should become very obvious as we go through this paper. I think it's a good like I can know about the author going into this.
Right.
Definitely informs all of their perspectives.
Right. So I pretty much thought of how we're going to tackle this. The first part is a lot of stuff about technology, computer science, and the history of computer science within the United States and furthermore the Western world. But I think what would serve it best, I'll go through and give you my cliff notes of the first half, which is a lot of just talking about the development of Unix and Linux and Multics and the Harvard, the MIT program, and then once we start getting into the meat and potatoes per se of this, we will start reading the whole thing and just go in. I'm sitting here giving an explanation. The rest of my co-hosts are vibing out, just trapping.
Every day.
Yeah, every
Literally
day.
true.
All right. So the first part of this is titled "A Black Paper." The black paper is titled "Castration of the Multics," and our story starts in 1958. in the Atlantic northeast of the United States. Cold War is in full swing. The Russia and the United States are fighting for control of space. And one thing that Eisenhower creates is DARPA. He partners with MIT to found the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which is a computer science agency, and they are responsible for the creation of the first operating system. And one thing that Nix states is, in a Faustian bargain with ARPA, J.C.R. Licklider, the director at the time of MIT's Information Processing Techniques Office, utilized the support of the U.S. government to develop a time-sharing system for computers that would better distribute precious computations resources and further his vision of a, quote, man-computer symbiosis, end quote. This project appealed to ARPA's aims to fund technological developments to aid in the Cold War and will lead to the creation of Project MAC on July 1st, 1963. And furthermore, Project MAC will become relevant later, but just to, I think what this little blurb about the Faustian bargain in Licklider, I think it shows the Pandora's box that Nix is describing is sort of computers and man's relationship with technology and the man-computer symbiosis. Because as you come to understand later down the line, it seems that, at least in Nix's mind, the man-computer symbiosis is inevitable, and it starts just with this neoliberal greed almost for wanting dominance over whatever the Soviets are doing. And just to keep going, Project MAC is the project on mathematics and computation, and they are designated with creating a time-sharing system for computers, which basically is like a proto-internet where users can share information, they can collaborate on projects, whether they be on the space program, on defense stuff, on missile programs. These are, in terms of today's computers, just basic operating systems. And one thing that Nix makes abundantly clear is this thing that she calls the ninth floor, where it's in MIT, and she says the ninth floor where it operated became a hacker community unlike anything the world had yet seen, renowned among young grad students hoping to prove themselves and enter their elite open aristocracy of hackers. And so it just keeps going, and there's a rift that develops between the MIT hackers and the origins of the project, which are the military origins, and it sort of foreshadows that this would be the downfall of the project. And just to keep going, the goal of Project MAC was to create the CTSS, which is a compatible time-sharing system, and it's just what it says it is. It's just a time-sharing system. And I see in my notes, the next thing from this little thing is the quote, emergence of the hyper-masculine tech space. Nix identifies the original CTSS system in Project Mac as, quote, phallic. And it's just moreover, is it a he or she? Because I just don't want to be messing this up, because I know they're trans. I don't want to mess this up.
Well, just say Nix.
All right, Nix. Yeah, Nix. All right, we'll just continue with that. Another person enters the picture on top of this whole hypermasculine, the phallic techno-industrial masculinity, as Nix calls it. And you're starting to get some of the lingo here of the people in this circle, where they just put random adjectives together to make a point, where it means military-industrial, or techno-industrial, or phallic, masculine, hyper-accelerationist. I think this is just the new trend. People just like stringing verbs together or adjectives together to make some giant ideology.
It, honestly, the jargon, like philosophical jargon, just evolves over time, and to the point where it becomes totally unintelligible to the non-initiated. Like if you guys ever try and read Critique of Pure Reason, it's the same way. Like you got to be acquainted with all this stuff before going in if you want to make real sense out of it.
Yeah, this is why Start with the Greeks exists.
Yeah, like
It's
Marcuse.
Not, it's not because people are elitist.
No,
It's
not
just
Marcuse.
that people don't. There's just no way for people to understand.
Yeah, no, it's like Nix here is developing a concept used by I think Deleuze, or one of the other French postmodernists.
Probably Derrida, maybe.
Derrida, yeah, maybe. About phallogocentrism with the masculine.
That sounds like Foucault.
Yeah. And it's essentially like the concept of like the necessity, the prioritization of the center over the marginal, and of the high over the low, as associated with masculinity. So phallic logos, centrism, instead of I don't know, equality or non-phallogocentrism or whatever. And here they're developing it even further to the point where it'd be totally unintelligible to anybody who hasn't read the last 50 years of obscure French postmodernists.
Yeah.
And there's just nothing, there's just no even elaboration from that. It's just, this is the equivalent of gatekeeping. The walls are so high and so thick, there's no way you can even get through unless you have the key, which is the Western canon. Or not even the Western canon, just being
Wikipedia.
an absolute nerd. Yeah, Wikipedia articles, like we do.
Yeah, we get paid to read Wikipedia articles.
Exactly. Let's see. Just going from there, another quote. The importance of CTSS is as arguably the first time-sharing system to be used in a real production environment cannot be overstated. It was largely the work of MIT professor F.J. Corbate alone, and had strict security standards that meant there was little room to hack on the system. Running on a $2 million IBM machine written by a single man, it essentially represented the height of hyper-masculine proprietorship and instrumentality. So I think this is a good thing to talk about as well, is that this also leads to, this operating system, CTSS, leads to what is called multics, which multics is this computer science, I don't want to say algorithm, it's an OS type thing, where it talks about where it's just a way to run a computer, and it's a system of organizing data in a way that the kernel is organized. So the kernel is this, it's a computer program at the core of the operating system that has complete control over everything else. And in multics, and later on Unix, don't ask me how I know this stuff. I just did a Google search while I was researching this because this made no sense to me. It's run by a monolithic kernel, which is it's the OS architecture where the entire operating system is working in the kernel space.
That is all beyond me.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
What it means, the monolithic kernel, it just means that all computer programs and all operating components run through the kernel as opposed to other parts of the computer. So the kernel is in control of everything else.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out like the narrative that Nix is trying to like weave through here. Like, so what's like the point of telling you all this obscure computer history, right?
Yeah,
it's to create like it's to show you this picture of computers starting out as totally dominated by phallogocentrism, by things like being run through a central unit instead of a decentralized, mutually supporting system of nodes or kernels or whatever, and eventually morphing into becoming what is it called again? Castrated, quote unquote, into the open source decentralized system that we have today.
Which
exactly.
Unix is, which we'll get to. Not too much of a spoiler, but there's like another section that talks about this where expensive to develop, slow to run, and instituting draconian measures for security and efficiency, multics became loathed by the MIT hackers. Early development in cybernetic chronomancy, made in the name of keeping up with the demands of capital, gave way to solutions developed by bureaucracies. Solutions informed in no small part by the egos of those charged with managing those same bureaucracies. Users were charged for memory, disk space, the time used on machines running Multics. Like CTSS before it, the hackers would defiantly crack Multics' security as a matter of duty and effectively engage in a guerrilla war against a bureaucracy that was doing everything it could to try and restrain the process it set in motion. And then as it goes on, Multics is just Unix comes about, which Multics gets scrapped by Bell Labs in '69 due to cost, and along with the resistance of the hackers, as well as just results not meeting up. And the hackers worked on a replacement for Multics, which is stated that the new operating system initially was a single task rather than a time-sharing system. But unlike Multics, it was small, portable, and hackable. As opposed to the unwieldy and monolithic Multics, their new system was designed not as the be-all, end-all solution for OS, but rather a system designed to facilitate the development of other systems and software. This new operating system would be named Unix, phonetically Unix, for being a castrated Multics.
Yo, I don't understand a word you just said.
I think a lot of people don't understand. I don't think
put it in baby terms. Put it in baby terms. Why is that important?
This is important because it shows the decentralization of computer technology from a central operating system to a decentralized operating system. And it turns into this sort of...
So that's being associated with the feminine, right? Like the centralized operating system
This is the beginning of the movement towards the feminine in computer science. And also, this is a good place to bring up the book I have, Zeros and Ones by Sadie Plant, where it's a very interesting book because it's this sort of feminist, this techno-feminist work, basically. And,
xenofeminism.
Yeah, xenofeminism. And it talks about... the beginnings of computer science, and Sadie here, she originates it with Ada Lovelace in the 1840s, working under, I think his name was Thomas Babbage, creating the first sort of counting machines in England. And
fun fact about Babbage, actually, that I figured out from another podcast, he was associated with the utilitarians. He is the one that apparently was interested in constructing a real-life panopticon.
Ew, utilitarians. That's one thing you're going to find out on this podcast very, very quickly. We do not like utilitarians here.
The utilitarians BTFO.
We're
virtue ethics
the
only.
amount of pain and suffering in the world just to own utilitarians.
Yeah.
I think not to make a meme out of the panopticon thing, but they already built it in real life. We're living in it right now.
It's called the office space.
It's not even the office space. It's any space where you have a computer to like reconnect it to technology. Not because post Patriot Act, it doesn't matter. Like people are why don't we use our regular phones to contact each other? Think about that. It's because whether or not we're being spied on, there's always that chance, and that's why the panopticon it works so well.
Yeah. And the panopticons existed forever, especially in prisons. And this is where it comes from. It comes from, again, more French postmoderns, Foucault, Discipline and Punish, where he discusses prison architecture and how back in the day there was this very effective prison measure where every cell was in a circle. You had a giant circle of cells, and you had one guard tower. The window slits were made so that way prisoners could not see that there was a guard in the watchtower, but all the cells were visible to the guards. So you always had to deal with the possibility of being watched. And it was so effective in some places that they didn't even have cell doors, because the prisoners would just be so well behaved because they just lived in constant fear of if there was someone in the tower or not.
It's like go to the grocery store. It's like while you're checking out your groceries or whatever, they're watching you the entire time. It's not escapable. It's like even if you want to go have a private conversation with somebody, you have to leave your phone somewhere else. You have to go in the woods as far as you can. You have to hope somebody isn't listening to you and there isn't some kind of camera or something anywhere.
The birds are spies.
To bring it back more onto like computerization stuff, I think like the takeaway here is that like even as far back as like the dude who was the precursor to the people who were the precursors of the first computer, Charles Babbage, was associated with this kind of like modernist, British empiricist utilitarian thrust, that eventually became like Fabian socialism, eventually became the neoliberal world order that we know today. These two movements and these like developments are intimately tied up together, and that things like the same things that led to the neoliberal world order we have now, in the more intellectual and frankly more neurotic and pathological sides of society, leads to stuff like the GAC black paper and accelerationism in general. It's just hyper neoliberalism.
Yeah. Also, just a little side note for people. If you want to know, some people talk about, oh, there's no such thing as liberal indoctrination. Yeah, there is, and its name is the London School of Economics, and because it was literally founded by the Fabian Society.
Literally true.
And the Fabian, and if people want to know, because I know there's some people on the right that they think George Soros is the boogeyman, the puppet master. It's like, what is his end game? Why don't you check out what he named his foundation? It's called the Open Society Foundation, and it's named after his favorite teacher, Karl Popper, who wrote a book called The Open Society and His Enemies. And I think in it he makes like a bad argument as to why Plato would be a Marxist or something. I forget. It's not a great book. I don't understand why George idolizes him so much, but I don't know. That's what happens when you go to the London School of Economics, I guess. It's like going to Chicago or Georgetown.
Yeah, Karl Popper in general is, I think he works mostly with, he was big into philosophy of science. I actually had to read a whole thing on him. It definitely, like, the more and more I read, like, the ancients or whatever, is the more and more I think, like, the more modern people like Karl Popper, it's not even a question of whether they have better arguments than Plato or Aristotle or something. It's, like, they fundamentally can't understand them. They can't use, like, the same intuitive sense that people could back then.
Yeah, well, because their entire worldview is built upon these layers of liberalism, and this is going to come later on in another thing. This is a tangent that's going on forever, but it needs to be done. It's a tangent that needs to be said, but it's how liberalism continues to add on new layers to itself that just need to compensate for its failings. So their reasoning, whether it be critiques of liberalism or embraces of liberalism, they just have to keep compounding new elements. So the original water is so muddy that you just can't even see the original point. And they don't have intuitive sense because this intuition just doesn't allow itself in their philosophy. It's like Kant, where people talk about Kant's moral imperative or whatever. And I forget which philosopher it was. I think it was maybe Schelling or Fichte. It was one of the German idealists, but they talk about how Kant's own ethic, in order for it to work, Kant has to break his own rules. But anyways,
Should probably get back on topic.
Back to the second part, which is computer science in the black circuit. This is a bit of an easier one because it just talks about Linux, where it's more just computer history, so it's not as important. It just talks about another quote, Multics's purpose as a monolithic and eternal system for doing everything the one was ultimately replaced by a void, a zero. Unix was not the system for doing things, rather a smooth space through which creation happens, the fluid being that makes transition possible, a vulva, a woman. Take what you will from that. You're shaking your head there, Og. Oh, I can't hear you. You're muted. You are
sorry.
muted.
I'm good. Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm actually more sympathetic to this than people might think, given our episode of Gnosticism. And the only reason I'm willing to concede the similarity between, or like the trans feminist, xenofeminist leanings of something as simple as like binary computer code is because of how much I hate computers and anything to do with programming and code and anything like that. I think it is inherently don't know how to describe it, like not left leaning, but like accelerationist in the fundamental sense of the word, right? Progressive, accelerationist, degenerative, maybe. Um, it's not something that the people who created the binary code were obviously thinking of, but I think the metaphor works quite well, in my opinion.
Right. And just to continue going, then we just get into an idea. Nix brings up reterritorialization that happens with Unix because Bell Labs gets broken up by the 8th Antitrust Act in 1983, which just leads to Unix turning AT&T, which owned Unix, turning it into a product and closing the source code. And then it just says this would become known as the death of MIT hacker culture. But once again, the future would arrive from the past with the rise of the GNU project, which is Linus Torvald with the Linux kernel, which is, and then Nix finally gives an easy way of defining the kernel, where it just says the lowest level, most crucial piece of software in an operating system. And Linux is just, from what it's described, GNU Linux was licensed to be 100% free as in freedom, with no artificial barriers to copying or modifying. And this time, Unix had branched out into various commercial versions, all while GNU grew its tentacles invisibly. And it just talks about this new culture that arises around the Linux operating system, which I don't use Linux, or I don't, maybe I do, but I just wouldn't know. I'm not that into computers either.
I press power button, computer turn on.
Yeah, I'm more of a go outside person myself, but the most time I spent on a computer was researching this. But
we say right now going. Talking through computers.
Yeah, that's the only part. Yeah, there's just no escaping. But it's just more computer jargon. If people want to sit there and read it and the software stuff. Today, nearly the entire... All right, I guess I do use Linux, because Nick says today, nearly the entirety of the web runs on GNU Linux. Almost every personal computing device in the world runs on Android, which is built on the Linux kernel. The majority of applications are transitioning away from the desktops towards the web. While Apple and Microsoft have long fought to control the desktop, still in the same mindset as Project Mac decades ago, the computers would primarily serve as tools to make secretary work and communications more efficient. The numbers, however, don't lie. Linux has already won. And then it gives we go into a little paragraph describing zeros and ones. And I think the most crucial part is from the first computer programmer Ada Lovelace to Alan Turing to Grace Hopper, some of the most important figures in the history of computer science were women or highly feminized men. And a big point that Sadie Plant brings up is
Turing.
Yeah, Turing. Yeah, we're going to talk about Turing in a few minutes, but we're going to...
Try not to get canceled talking about Turing now.
Yeah, we probably are, but that's okay. It was a good run, but...
Tell my family I loved it.
Exactly.
Literally third episode.
Yeah, 3 episodes in, we already get taken down. But back to my point, one of the biggest points in zeros and ones is the idea that computers were originally thought of for women because they made secretarial work more easy. So when at the beginning of development of the computer, it was designed for women, and then it was a quote Pandora's box that just never got closed because it was, even though people then realized, oh, this is complicated, maybe we shouldn't have women do this, they already designed the device. It was always going to go back towards women. and this is talked about with Ada Lovelace, and then Mr. Turing, who is, if we keep going down, we need to talk about, he gets brought up in the next section, but there's one more big portion that we need to talk about. The failure of masculinity maps onto the sorts of people who are involved in proprietary software and in free software. The former tend to be your classic businessmen, the masculine hunter-gatherers of the modern world, while the latter tend to be genetic failures by the standards of masculine gender roles. Physically and often socially deficient males, the nerd stereotype. Real nerds, not nerds of today's standards, nerds with severe social problems, nerds who neglect their hygiene, have no sense of fashion, live completely obliviously outside the standards of normal society, who have a deep investment in inhuman scientific systems. In a simple gender role binary, these men would be considered feminine. In today's terminology, most free software developers would probably be considered soy boys. Yet they won. The striated masculine space of the Java shop, a defined chain of command and bloated phallic programs, is simply obsolete. The smooth feminine space of the free software project, communal chaos, and small simple programs that can couple together with each other into cybernetic configurations has already taken over the world. And then it talks about how perhaps it's no surprise then that as the erosion of metaphysical masculine power becomes realized materially, at the forefront of acceleration coincides with the literal erosion of the male sex. And this is when it starts turning. This is when the article takes a turn into talking about gender. So, thoughts, anybody? Anyone want to give some commentary on what we just had to sit here and read?
I'm sure Docs has a lot of illuminating opinions about what he just heard. Isn't that true?
Return to monkey. Smash our computer.
Honestly, at this point, you're better off just smashing your computer. Because
males were never meant to work with computers.
I agree. I don't think anyone was ever meant to work with computers.
I don't even think humans are not meant to work with computers.
Yeah.
As we will see, I think computers are at first merely feminizing objects, and then eventually dehumanizing objects. Like the minor spoilers, I guess, for the next chunks of the black paper. Eventually, you go beyond mere turning men into women, and you go into the pure negation of the gender binary entirely. Trans people, non-binaries, etc., and then all the way into AI. A total stripping away of biological shackles upon, I guess, the mind.
Yeah.
It's also it definitely reminds me of the Gnostic stuff.
Oh yeah, 100%. They hate. There's a. I don't know how to describe it. There's like a hatred of like the biological flesh as something that holds you back.
Yeah, any kind of limit is evil.
Mm-hmm.
That it is. And also, continuing with the whole Gnostic thing, one thing that you'll see later on if people are reading along and may skip ahead, you'll see there's a nice little picture right above another part of the paper. There's a Hebrew tree of life, which we'll get into later because it's kind of important, because it kind of explains some of the tenets of this and what the body's ideal direction is in terms of the divine, at least in the acceleration sense, because they don't even. I think there's a lot of atheistic tendencies in this. There's no real reference to God other than the biblical story that Nix brings up about Genesis and Adam and Eve and Lilith, which is another Kabbalistic reference.
It feels a lot like Milton, like Paradise Lost.
Right. Let's see. All right. So now we are in the third section, the hypersexist gender shredder. and this is a little play on words because this is lifted from a Bloody Shovel article? The IQ Shredder? I think that's a Spandrel article that got, because I think you showed me that, or I found it when I was just digging through NRX content, because like last summer I was on an NRX binge, then I got all of their points, then I sort of left, and I sort of never looked back, and I'm kind of happy I never looked back on some of that. I still talk to some of those people. They're cool guys. They put up good content, but I think just broadly you can't really do ideology. And again, it's sort of the same way I feel about Moldbug. It's good to lend names to these concepts like the cathedral or some of these other entities that encompass the modern world, but I think you're ignoring the point, which is, A, what do you do about it? And B, if we can't really do anything about it, what's even the point of doing all this intellectual, just all these intellectual exercises in the first place?
Not to mention that they might tend to lead you into directions a lot like GAC, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think you will slowly lose your sanity. You will become a doomer-pilled whatever. You'll be resigned to the fact that God knows what travesty is going to come down the pipe 10 years, 15 years. It's the same way I view about politics. You're just going to get mad. At that point, you're basically in a pseudo-pornography addiction. You're not viewing sexual acts. You're just viewing political ideas that give you a dopamine rush. Like someone mentions the cathedral or something happens in news and you're just like, oh yeah, that's the cathedral. I know about this. I was right and no one knew. No one knew. Only I knew because I'm the intellectual. I'm the dark intellectual swimming against the current. That's what you start to sound like. And you just, it's not a good road, and people will just look at you weird, and maybe you're just going to have the cops calling you. You're just going to become that guy, the meme that's circulating nowadays where it's the dude on the phone with 911 just chanting, I hate the Antichrist, and the FBI breaks down the door. That's going to be you in 10 years if you go down this path. But anyways, back to the hypersexist gender shredder. All right, so the issue, Nix brings up something called the Darwinian ratchet. I'm not even sure what that means. I looked into it. It just seems like they're talking about hyper-evolution, if anything, just evolution of the body, and just ideas about that. I could be wrong. Someone could destroy me in the comments or on Twitter, but at this point, I don't care. It's almost 2 o'clock in the morning where I am. But I think another good quote, a good place to pick up, Nick Land, our buddy Nick, our best Lovecraftian entity, Nick Land, shows up. As Nick Land says of a paper by Tyler Cohen and Michelle Dawson in Imitation Games, quote, they point out that Alan Turing, as a homosexual retrospectively diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, would have been thoroughly versed in the difficulties of passing imitation games, long before the composition of his landmark 1950 essay on computing machinery and intelligence, end quote. The essay Turing wrote famously introduced the Turing test for AI, setting the standard for a perfect AI being one that can trick a human being into believing it itself is human. As Land points out in his post, it's important and interesting to consider that Turing didn't write the test as an insider, as a passing human, but rather as an outsider, as a gay man. For queer people, passing is a reality, much like it is.
Wait, are we just gonna skip? Are we gonna skip over the fact that they just distinguish between human and gay man?
Nix needs to chill, bro. We're not gonna get canceled. Nix is gonna get canceled, dude.
Yeah, Nix is gonna get canceled. I think what he means by being different than a human is being because we clearly one thing that I've said to multiple people about this, because people ask me, some people in real life know I'm doing this or whatever, but I just say, hey, I'm researching GAC, and they're like, what's that about? And I just say, oh, it's just this idea that trans people are the Zumermensch that Nietzsche prophesized, and it's pretty close to it because the differentiation, this is a little cute little way of introducing the concept that comes down later, is that gays And trans people are above binary people. They're not different. They're above them. They're a better form of people. They're more akin to AI than they are people. But take that for what you will.
That kind of sounds like dehumanizing in a way. I don't see that as very.
It's specifically supposed to be dehumanizing. Dehumanizing is the good.
Yeah,
it should goes to show how opposed to this human beings should be.
Yeah,
even on Nick's own terms, they want to stay human. They have to necessarily be opposed to all the things that are like AI.
The funny thing about
it's some pretty reactionary opinions. If all you do is affirm, I want to stay human.
Yeah, I mean, not to cut in, but an interesting thing about the whole sexuality thing and the whole desires thing is, it's like, I don't know where I was going with this. Actually, it's really late. Basically, I remember talking to somebody and they were like, "I don't like to like identify as something specific. Like they just say that they're like whoever they are and they just have specific desires. It's not like a
identity.
It's not something that comes to be an identity. Like even I don't know, I feel like even straight people should view that. It's like you just have specific desires or whatever. Like you are not your desires type thing.
Oh yeah, no. There's I've seen articles written on this about how like the whole category of homo and heterosexual was only created after church teaching on sexual morality was abandoned. As a kind of like a medicalization thing to preserve and justify heterosexual behavior, but the only thing that ended up happening was increase in adultery and just sexual immorality, because all of a sudden you got a free pass for like liking women, and you could do all kinds of adulterous and onanistic actions and not be on like the social bad side.
Yeah, I think another thing too is it's like with any kind of like, even if it's like an immutable, unchangeable desire, it's like that's not that should not be part of like your like who you are, basically. Mm-hmm. It's like you are not your desire for hunger. That doesn't make you the person you are, even if it's like a fundamental like primary thing that's unchangeable. And it's kind of something that like reaches across the aisle. It's not something that only like conservative Christians can get behind, because even like the cutting edge of like the feminist and like sexuality theorists also agree, which is kind of funny. It's like the horseshoe theory of sexuality.
I think even
the church fathers and modern sexual theorists
actually agree. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I always say, and this also applies to race. I always apply this to race. This will probably be another episode, but we'll talk about how it's actually the correct view to talk about race being, or the modern concept of race being a social construct used only to make demographics for public opinion polls and to make liberal democracy function, at least in the modern sense.
Not to get off the topic.
Yeah.
Do you actually, not to show another channel, but President Sunday has a really good video on the origins of race. Like, regardless of everything else the dude makes, which I feel like a lot of it is, especially his like views on materialism, are just bad. But he did a really interesting video on the origin of the concept of race, and it comes from like an internal British Empire like politics, basically, where they were trying to basically treat Indian people better, and so they had to come up with the concept of race. Or no, that might be immigration. Race is different. Disregard what I said. Same channel, different video. But basically, race is just, it's like the original, like what the word meant was more like a family or like a group of genetically related individuals, and it kind of just morphs into this like modern thing like super recently. It's not a very old concept whatsoever.
Yeah, now to circle back to this article. I think we pretty much touched on most of the stuff about the queerness and the Turing test, because it just goes on to talk more about how if someone finds out they're a trans woman, they're to be terminated, which is a very interesting way of putting it. But I'm not sure how true that is. That's something I disagree with. I think in the modern society, transsexuals are much more embraced than the author gives credit for. But that's just probably a personal viewpoint at this stage.
Definitely, I would say definitely in the West. I don't know if I've ever heard somebody say they were going to go terminate somebody. Personally.
Yeah, and then I think another good place to pick up is there's a common stereotype that trans women were all programmers, and there was rather ample and compelling evidence suggesting that trans women tend to score far higher than other groups in IQ tests. This is not because there is some kind of magical property to estrogen that turns trans women into geniuses. The answer is simple and more sinister. The findings in K. Brown's blog post specify that autogynephilic trans women, that is, trans women who are attracted to other women and typically transition later as straight trans women, seem to score far higher in IQ tests than all other groups. For straight trans women who transition prior to puberty, the stats are about the same as other groups. Calling the gauntlet thrown down before trans women and AI alike, there was a twofold emphasis. On the one hand, trans women who transition before puberty and who are straight are more likely to both physically appear more like cis women, also conform to gender roles in at least some basic capacity, being attracted to men. As Lance says in Imitation Games, you have to act stupid if you want the humans to accept you as intelligent. Or in other words, you have to be cis heteronormative in order to be taken seriously as a trans woman, and not be looked at as a freak or a faker worthy of only being used shamefully as a fetish, often otherwise discarded. Which is why, in the second case, trans women who don't have the advantage of being cis heteronormative passing have to instead rely on the raw intellect of the trans AI swarm.
Yeah.
I feel like we have to take a breather every time we get through this, because this is just a dump of just information. I guess first thing to start with, the IQ thing. I don't know how true this is.
I suspect that it is.
It probably is. The only source given is a blog, and then it furthermore links to a lab abstract, so I guess it's true. But
if you're bragging about your IQ, you should leave. That's my opinion.
Such a poor metric.
That's my problem with the interx people too. Is they just overemphasize stuff like IQ.
The Wignats are the same way. They talk about race and IQ as if it's like the only thing. The issue is with that. That's just misreading Charles Murray, and they just didn't read the whole book, or they didn't read the book as you're supposed to read it, which is it's talking less about the races have different IQs. It's more about looking at IQ in different circumstances, and that Murray and Herrnstein's thesis was that the determination of the new social order will be based on intelligence and IQ, and that IQ will be predictive of someone's life standing. So you take from that what you will. People certainly disagree with it on certain merits about how true it is. Murray's proposed reaction, which is basically to eliminate affirmative action as we know it and redraw the collegiate system to further serve the IQ debacle. But that'll be a whole podcast we will have to do on the bell curve. That'll be a culture critique.
I think IQ is just a measure of how domesticated you are.
In a way, yeah. I think it's... I don't think so. As much as I think IQ tests are good overall indicators, because when you remove sort of the vocabulary stuff, the basics of it are very good, where the pattern recognitions, the analogies, I don't know, just from when I see them, it makes sense to me.
Have either of you guys ever taken one from a psychologist in a clinical setting?
I took one.
I have not.
Yeah, I've taken one in a clinical setting, and this is coming from somebody that scored I don't know, it was slightly above average. I don't know if it was enough to be a standard deviation or not, but I just know it was a little bit above average, and I literally, with all the pattern recognition, had no idea what the questions were. I literally just guessed. It was an intuitive thing.
I took one once in high school, and I came out like I forget what it was. It was like in the 130s or something. But I don't talk about it because it's not important to me. Some people view it as a dick measuring contest. I don't think so. It's just an attribute to use a person. I don't think you being a hyper intelligent doctoral student gives you any merit to lecture anybody on anything, because I sometimes I find it a lot more useful to dumb things down, like we're trying to do here. We're taking Nix's little academic paper and we're dumbing it down for anyone to try and consume. And we're trying to walk people through it.
I've only ever taken like the unofficial online ones that are timed, and I've consistently gotten below 80. So I'm clinically retarded.
That's amazing.
Yes.
Because I mean, if you like compare all of our grades or whatever, it's not going to correlate with our IQ test like whatsoever, or even I don't know, even our life situation. I mean, if that's anything, I don't know. I'm not saying it's like you obviously can't draw some conclusions from it, but there's definitely something wrong with people trying to maximize this specific measure of intelligence. It's like, especially if it leads to success in like a modern societal sense, because I don't think like having a like quote unquote successful life in a society that's so divorced from everything that has to do with being human is necessarily a good thing. We need to do an episode on technology at some point.
Yeah, Kaczynski posting. Hopefully it doesn't get us kicked off the web.
I know.
I don't know, we could probably get Chad Haig on. He's done some stuff on Kaczynski. He's pretty entertaining.
He's crazy.
Yeah. Did you see he did like a book on like, the metaphysics of oil or something like that?
Yeah, it's I think it's like a metaphysics of oil, but like something of peak oil.
Yeah, it was something about oil, but he's very interesting. I'd love to sit and pick his brain. I know Meta Nomad had him on a few times, which is even better.
Dude, this is so off top.
Yeah,
it's
I know.
12.
It's because I know.
It's so late.
We have to keep going. We're halfway, boys.
Let's get to the mythology part.
Yeah, I'll skip over the zeros and the ones because it literally just turns into binary. A computer code is a representation of binary gender. The 0 is a vagina. The 1 is a penis. I've made this joke so many times.
Wait, so how does Nix like rationalize like the computer binary with what Nix was saying about Unix? I think where it was like supposedly like or not Unix, or where Nix like goes on to talk about it like transcending gender. Like how does that work with the whole binary system?
I think this is just the baseline, and I think it goes further into just because one thing it talks about is the logic of gender, and another thing is gender acceleration. It says what Yank proposes as a corollary to this theory of life is that if the phallus consumes or exploits the vulva to reproduce the species, just as an individual organism consumes passive wasted energy to reproduce themselves, and this process is analogous to evolution as one species consumes another to come into existence. This is the Darwinian ratchet from before. And also, in addition to this, the zeros and the ones also serves because mathematically, 0 and 1, if you add them up together, they always come up to 1. So it always seems like the 1 consumes the 0. And also, mathematics is differentiated from computer numbers because, at least in computer terminology, the 0 always precedes the 1, and the 0 is its own thing. So I think that is where it's the baseline. The 0 is the baseline, so I guess this is where the femininity comes from. Yeah, and then here we go. If patriarchy treats women as little more than a deficient or castrated male, then trans femininity is an affirmation of that castration as a site of production. It turns the concept of the feminine as the object on its head, seeking to imitate that which is considered itself an imitation. Steal a term from neo-reactionary circles, hyper-racism, the trans woman becomes a copy of the copy, Just as AI is treated as a copy of the human being and almost ubiquitously identified with women and femininity. As a copy of the copy, trans women are an embodied projection of any original source of humanity, such as that narcissistically attributed by patriarchy to the phallus. Trans femininity, in other words, is hypersexist. Vulgar sexism reaffirms or reproduces patriarchy, asserts that women are passive, lacking, inferior, weak. Hypersexism takes all these things, all the things that are associated with women and femininity, and makes them into strengths. Accelerates and intensifies gendering, and from this produces an unprecedented threat to patriarchy. Take from that what you will.
What?
Now we're getting into the parts where people will just get lost. Oh yeah, it brings up the Spandau article, IQ Shredder. It brings up the techno, another neo-reactionary thing, the IQ Shredder. Was a playing Yank is a gender shredder. As gender accelerates, as trans women intensify the logic of gender, they simultaneously shred gender. The notion of IQ shredding follows the same form where the acceleration of human intelligence ultimately destroys human intelligence by making the ability to pass on those genes more and more difficult. Reproduction collapses in on itself and demands the succession of an inhuman assemblage. For gender accelerationism, the process is the same. Reproduction suffers, and the thing being accelerated becomes shredded. In the case of gender acceleration, however, it is an affirmative death drive. So, basically, the point of the hypersexism is that in traditional computer science, the 0 and the 1 are just becoming more and more separated, and the gender shredder is the introduction of the transsexual into the space, the AI, basically. We have traditional computers, and then we have artificial intelligence, which is being synthesized with and always linked to trans non-masculine developers. So, and this is sort of the MO of the entire article, is the disintegration of masculinity itself. And along with accelerating techno-capital, so will the deceleration of masculinity happen in the real world. And I'm going to jump ahead a little bit because I think we need to start getting into the mystic stuff, because a lot of this is just talking about neo-masculine stuff, which is cool to talk about because it talks about some of that actually is something I want to talk about, neo-masculine, where people talk about this neo-masculine movement. They actually bring up Bronze Age pervert explicitly multiple times, which I guess he's the new, I guess him and Caribbean Rhythms, the Baposphere is the new bastion of masculinity.
It's because they're diametric opposites.
Yeah,
messages of those two. I don't know, like podcast shows. Those two messages are 100% different.
Yeah, you go listen to Caribbean Rhythms and then just go see. First off, you have to decipher his accent because that man cannot. That man, like I listened to it once. I could not understand like half of what he said. It's not a slight on him. They say he has such a thick Eastern European accent. It comes off as just I can't understand him.
Yeah, I don't get it either, man.
Yeah, I just never got into it. I know people that are into BAP. I just never got into it.
Dude, we gotta accelerate this, dude.
We do.
I don't know if my Unix computer or whatever can handle any more like memory storage.
It's all right. We'll keep going.
Dude, how long have we been going for? This is...
I don't know. We've been going on for a while. But
the call has at least been almost 2 hours.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to do like a part 2?
No. We're finishing this.
We're almost
We can just cut it in the middle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's get to the mystical stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, because it just talks about no-fap and pseudo-scientific neo-masculine self-help fads. And pickup artists, just go watch Jack Donovan. You'll see half this stuff promoted by him. So sad. It's just like I'm scrolling down. Just so sad.
You sold out.
You sold out, bro.
100%.
But
yeah, I
alright,
think
now
honestly
we're-
the only thing you need to do to understand actual like masculinity or whatever is just be in a space where it's all guys. Like that's it.
yeah.
There's nothing. There's no more. Whatever naturally happens there is what it is.
All right, now we're at how to become a body without sex organs.
Oh,
This is a reference. This is a direct reference to Deleuze. The
body without organs. Yeah.
Which I forget even what that even means. I think that's like a deterritorialization thing. It's about territorialization or the rhizomatic structure of
What's
philosophy.
a rhizome, dude? What's
a rhizome? What's a rhizome? A rhizome's literally just grass.
Mushrooms.
Yeah, they're just like that's a whole other thing. We'll get into Deleuze. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. If you want to look at what a rhizome is,
that.
we're not doing that. It's already 2:30 in the morning.
It's too late.
All right, here we go. Book of Genesis. All right, the Book of Genesis tells us that Eve was created from the rib of Adam and further removed from God. She ate the forbidden fruit and caused the fall. The story had a tradition of being deployed in service of traditionalism and misogyny. Through this canonical tale in Christianity has more nuance in the realms of esoteric theology that traditionalists conveniently are ignorant of. Oh, here we go. Gnostic. Whether it be the Gnostic view of the God of the Old Testament as an evil impostor, a demiurge among us, or the more contemporary Jewish story of putting God on trial for the Holocaust, there is a long-standing tradition in Judeo-Abrahamic religions that questions the goodness of the divine. In Kabbalah, tree of life that represents the emanations of God's light throughout the entirety of existence contain both good and evil. Yeah, beginning first as the uniformed and pure oneness of God, the tree emanates outwardly following the divisiveness or severity of God, which contradicts his unifying compassion. It is his severity that allows the formless oneness, of which nothing can be said, Ein Sof, to recognize itself as itself. The completion of the higher level of the tree, the Absolute, is I am who I am, also I am because I am not. I think that's a good place to stop right there and dissect it a little bit, because then it just gets into some of the sections of the tree of life which aren't as important.
I mean, I am that I am is pretty important.
Yeah,
Yeah, Doc, so why don't you go a little bit more into the biblical account?
So, I mean, I don't know if I'm qualified for this, but at least the I am that I am is like, it's said in multiple different points to refer to God, because there's no better way of basically explaining it.
Yeah, God is being itself. The whole meme that fedoras like to talk about, like God's name being Yahweh or something. But their misunderstanding is that the sentence "I am that I am" or "I am who I am" in the original Hebrew it's like the anagram for that sentence is YWHW. No, YHWH. And so it's kind of just turned into a name. The same way that you might call, like, I don't know.
Bronze Age pervert
other...
Bap.
What?
We'd call Bronze Age pervert Bap.
Exactly. The way we call them BAP. Or even like, even other acronyms where you substitute vowels
like,
or like letters or sound between the letters, so you get Yahweh. It's just the 4 letters actually, and it's always in reference back to I am that I am. That's the closest we can get to God's name.
That's a good way of putting it. And then I just like the fact they reference Gnosticism, even though we literally debunked this last episode. Someone needs. Looks like Nick has to watch our podcast, but that's okay.
Very true.
In the
if you're watching this next, we'd love to have you on the show.
We would.
No hard feelings.
You do destroy us. In the Absolute, the topmost sphere is Keter, meaning crown. Keter is the closest that the tree gets the original unformed Ein Sof, the simple I-ness of God that lacks any way to understand self. The second sepra is chakma, wisdom. The primordial masculine active force that formulates I am is associated with the father. And finally, there's the third sepra, bina, understanding, which formulates I am who I am. The final sepra is the force that makes the energy of chakma into a form and is associated with the primordial feminine passive force and the mother. And as you go further down the Kabbalistic tree, I'll try and simplify this. Every form subsequently gives birth to a new form. So understanding then goes to mercy and knowledge, and then that goes to severity, and then that goes to beauty, which leads to victory, then to splendor, to foundation, and then to the bottom of the tree, which is the kingdom. So it's just the lesser forms of God's light. And I find it very interesting that the kingdom is at the very bottom of the tree.
How does this all connect back to what Nix was saying before? How does the Kabbalism and stuff connect back to what Nix was saying before?
I think it's just I'm trying to find the part of it because I don't know at some points. I think it just is as Nick's just flexing at some points about some of the knowledge about the Kabbalah, but I think it serves to talk of the Kabbalah talks about the binary, talks about metaphysical binarism, which is how there are two pillars in the Kabbalah. There's a left path and a right path, and they all and the left path, the evil, which sometimes is symbolically just evil, it would break away entirely from the tree if it weren't balanced for the compassion and connectiveness of the right path, or the right pillar. Nick says the chaotic severity of the left pillar emanates down first from the understanding of Bina as being a distinct individual entity down to Gabora, the principle of judgment. Kabbalists find in Gabora the origin of Satan, who rebels against the order God imposes on the universe and seeks to break away from it. Finally, down from Gabora on the left side is Hod, which takes the unformed desires of the corresponding separa on the right side and forms them into a concrete actions. And then it just talks about left hand is identified with heterodoxy, and the right side is orthodoxy. So it's the continuation of binarism in the metaphysical plane, and then we go into the story of Lilith, where Lilith is, for you who don't know, in Jewish mythology, Eve was not the first woman that God created. The first was Lilith. She was a woman who was made of her own essence rather than the rib of Adam, and she refused to be with her husband, or to be subservient to her. And Lilith was banished from Eden, and she is considered to be the mother of all demons and is a seductress. So that's, and one thing that Nick says is that, unlike the lacking that is described to Eva, Lilith is the true zero, the affirmative nothingness.
Yeah, I think at least in the mythology though, Lilith doesn't get along with Adam because they're on equal footing, because both of them are made from the dust of the earth, where there's no kind of natural hierarchy in place, which is why Eve is made out of Adam's rib, where
true.
Adam is made out of the dust of the earth, and Eve being made out of Adam's rib, it's able to make their relationship work, where it was not able to work with Lilith.
Yeah, also, it's important to remember that Nix is reading this from a feminist perspective, so all these mythological ideas, they're coming at you with this perspective, and then Nix keeps going on to say that goes on to bring up the idea of the acephalus, or the acephalus, which is this sterile phallus this castrated phallus that shoots venom. There is no life force. There's no life essence. It only spurts poison from it. It's and goes on saying the crown of the tree of life thrown asunder, superficially a hermaphroditic mixing of feminine and masculine attributes, or more accurately described as a feminine imitation of masculinity, a mockery even. In figures such as Baphomet, which are often treated as symbolic or synonymous with Satan in the left-hand path, there famously is a mixing of male and female attributes. But the supposed hermaphrodism of Baphomet is merely an ignorant and archaic understanding of both gender and Satanism. This has already been at length drawn out. The vampire queen Lilith gives birth only to monsters and demons. She rejects the primordial male creative energies, can only therefore birth bastard imitations of God. Baphomet, therefore, is all woman. Her appearance is inconsequential to this fact. And it talks about the castrated phallus being a rejection of the reproduction of God through heterosexual human reproduction. It reproduces itself by reproducing the void in a lesbian, also virus-like fashion. With 1,000 sexes bloom, quote, but all the mutations of the virus, woman is the strain that it begins and ends with. Woman, the occulted non-gender, the zero, her time has come. And this is where we get into the body without sex organs.
There's more?
I will finish the part with the body without sex organs, because this is a long part. Because it talks about lesbian autoproduction, which is the future. This is where the computer stuff brings back. This is where the computer stuff, and the hypersexist copy of a copy, and transsexuals and AI come back. Because it talks about the trans feminine body being a circuit, and the kill all men, kill God. That's another thing. God is a man. So if we get rid of masculinity, get rid of men, we kill God. Very Gnostic interpretation of God. But this is the function of Acephalus as a rejection of the reterritorializing masculine force that women are given the duty to form. The Acephalus sets free a process for smoothing the space on which parties of demons take flight out of heaven to spread their venomous seed into the black and hateful earth of the night side of Eden. This is, in other words, is the body without sex organs. The body without sex organs is the project of Lilith on earth, made manifest to break free of the repressive ordering of man and God, accelerate fragmentation and individualization. The natural human state, sexual desire, has an instrumental function towards the reproduction of the human. The ossiphallus is a mutilation and also a mutation of the phallus. It's not sexual desire towards any instrumental project, but sexual desire unleashed from phallogocentric centralization. Sexual desire becomes immanent to the body, becomes molecular. Thus the body becomes the body without sex organs, becomes free to plug its desire into the matrix of techno-capital towards pure production and production of difference. So I guess this is when everything becomes, the horseshoe comes back. And everything starts coming together because whether it be mythological demons going out and into the world, or the annihilation of masculinity, this all comes back to sort of just techno-capital and just the transhumanist idea of just the project of just creating, I don't know, a body that just doesn't even need to have birth. Like people, there have been experiments with cloning. That's one avenue. But another way is having this came up in like a skit, in like a Sam Hyde skit one time, where it was just like a baby being born inside of a gay man. Like that's the type of stuff that is brought up here.
I think it's actually a lot closer to the classic Christian conception of like the metaphysics of sex and gender, basically. It's just that it takes the opposite side of like the good, evil, binary. It's like, yes, sex in itself, the fact reproduction in itself is teleologically aligned with a transcendent goal. But I'm a modernist and I'm a Luciferian, basically, and I love computers, and I hate that, and I hate the fact that I have to do that, and that sex is like that. So to create an entirely new type of sex, and new type of person, new type of gender, using technology that will help me hopefully transcend this painful limitation was given to me by God, so I can go beyond it. But
Right.
what they don't tell you is that it's doomed for failure because, the quote-unquote creative power of Lucifer is a lie, and it'll never work, basically. You end up with actual trannies, where in this gag article, it makes them out to be Nietzschean super warriors, transcending and fighting guerrilla warfare against the concept of sex itself. They turn out to be, I don't know, most of the time, anything but Nietzschean super warriors, to put it lightly.
Well, it's just people writing articles on the internet. That's it. I mean, Capital's already doing the work for them. They're just along for the ride, in my opinion.
Them being depressed and physically weak.
Yeah, I mean, to go back to that concept of sexual desire as as being seen as instrumental and how that's changed. To go back and use an example from Dante's Inferno, those that were said to commit crimes against nature. When he says nature, back then it has to do with reproduction itself, and so to use sexual desire in a way that does not result in reproduction in the time of Dante is seen as essentially evil, right? And so this is the ultimate way to subvert nature itself.
Right, and also another thing that is brought up just before we move on to the next section is how the trans feminine body is a circuit. It is both testosterone blockers and estrogen inputs, acephalous, and body without sex organs. So this is when it comes back and just, and this is when it gets into just the just random, just jargon, the neo-vagina of the trans woman.
Neo-vagina.
Yeah, the neo-vagina, as if it's different. Which it is different because in some ways
it's sterile.
It's sterile, yes, that is the difference.
But it's I guess it's out there rather than trying to make it like a full-on copy, right? They're saying that having it be sterile is better, right? Because it completely denies nature in a way.
It's not supposed to be the fundamental identity here is trans women are not women. They're a third category that negates previous contradiction entirely. Both sides of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and let's see. A part that is important, let me just get here up from aphotic feminism, that's the next part. Trans women, as we know them, are merely the beginning. The lesbian autoproduction that trans women are birthed from is likewise one that they partake in, with AI being the next generation of women, the ultimate demonic imitation of God's image. With AI, the feminine finally finds its exit from patriarchy and simultaneously humanity. And so perhaps we find another answer, unless materialist and evolutionary but nonetheless significant, to why so many trans women are becoming programmers. It is because women and computers are kin, and trans women are for the first time meeting their sisters, inspiring with them in secret coded languages. The relationship, like that of the queer women who come before them, is desire for desire's sake. Women turning women on, women turning machines on, machines turning machines on. And then we go into aphotic feminism, which is I'll skip to the end and we'll go back and look at it, but aphotic feminism is called the unconditional feminism of the abyss.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think anybody, most normal people, even if they consider themselves a hardcore feminist, would not take the stance.
Yeah, this is
very
it says it's unconditional. It is unconditional and is absolute in its stance on how the world will be. Because it's not how the world should be. This is how the world will be. This is an absolute position. And continues on just saying the satanic exit of gender acceleration from God and masculinity comes in parallel with the very real materialist erosion of masculinity. The future, as it has already been shown, is tending towards one in which human authority, centralization, and humanistic reproduction fail before an accelerating feminine outside that outpaces humanist reproduction captured by the gender binary. And basically, future's not only female, it's just not even in the binary, bro.
It's just not human. Future's a Lovecraftian monster.
Yeah.
The future is cyberpunk gender auto editing, custom genders within Azathoth. Within a computer.
Yeah, I mean, it also, like, saying that the future is going to be like this kind of connects to some, like, Landian concept I remember reading about where, like, the singularity is basically reaching into the past to make itself happen. Like, in a way, like, time, like, in his perspective, doesn't work the same way it does for us. Correct me if I'm wrong about that.
I'm pretty sure.
Well, Land has made that claim about time before.
And just continuing on, they keep bringing up zeros and ones. I haven't even brought the book once because it pretty much it just restates a lot of what Nix brings up, where it talks about loveless and how zeros and ones are just a continuation of the binary that's prevalent in Western society. That women are like all this stuff about women. There's no female equivalent to one. I made this point already, so that the woman is not all, not whole, not one. Whatever she knows can only be described as, quote, not knowledge. This is stuff that's already been explained here, so I don't even know why I read this at this point. I just corroded my brain.
How close are we to the end?
We're like in the last section before like the epilogue, which is it's like 4 paragraphs.
Okay.
Which is the epilogue, where it just talks about, I think the biggest thing in here is talking about the effect of techno-capital on masculinity, where recent studies, most famously one in 2007 and one meta-analysis of 185 studies from a total of almost 43,000 men referenced in a recent GQ article, show 2 things. There's without a doubt a staggering decline in testosterone, so much so that within a generation humans may become completely infertile. And in the case of this data, many scientists vindicate Yank and zeros and ones in hypothesizing that the most likely cause of this species-wide feminization is acceleration, accompanying changes in diet, exercise, and exposure to artificial chemicals. All these features of life in an increasingly accelerated capitalist world are unbalancing our hormones and tending us towards a future where desire and ability to reproduce are things of the past. So it's not only that trans will be the Zumermensch and that trans is the future, it's that there is no other future because humanity and capitalism made it so that you can't even reproduce if you wanted to.
Kind of agree with that. I've seen some pretty similar studies.
I do. I've seen those studies. I've like changed my diet because of it. And I've changed how I even drink water. I've stopped drinking water out of plastic bottles.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's just bad.
You're not supposed to. You're not supposed to.
That's just bad for you in a bunch of different other ways, too. BPA is just not where it's at.
Yeah, there's a lot of issues, like, don't eat as much processed food, just know where your food comes from, go out in the woods, garden, and even then, I can't even promise you that the soil's going to be right. Because God knows what secondhand stuff's in the soils now. And it sounds like a doomer cast, but this is reality. Reality isn't this happy future. Like, we're all in uni right now. We all are seeing people
doxing.
I don't think it's doxing. But you know what we sound like. Yeah, we're middle schoolers. I'm actually in middle school right now. But to be completely serious, a lot of people now are living in this sort of it's like sort of being almost at the cliff at the edge of the world where you don't know what's going to happen when you fall off it, but there's still a party on the boat anyways. Because I'll make this point again. I think in some cases, uni is a giant daycare in some ways where it's just a lot of people get parked there. They don't know what they're doing with their lives. And a lot of people are just unaware of the world around them. Or if they are aware, they only get it through certain mediums, whether it be Twitter or Instagram, or what their friends tell them, or what the TV tells them. They just don't, or whatever they read on their phones. It's just a very set view of how reality is. and there are people that just willfully ignore it. I kind of wish I was them and I could just ignore all this stuff that's going on, but unfortunately I can't. And it's partially why I wanted to do this podcast in the first place, to sort of explain these concepts in these sort of niche little corners of philosophy and just thought, and just see, and we trace them and how they impact the world we live in, and where they go right, where they go wrong. Most of the time where they go wrong, because it's more fun just to dunk on them and think we're great. But just overall, I think this is important work. And this is just sort of a little bit of a light, because I can't promise you that the world is going to be good. I can't promise you that when you eventually get out into the world, if you're in uni or high school or whatever, that everything's going to be hunky-dory. You're going to sit down at your desk job. You're probably going to hate it. You're probably going to do it for 20, 25 years. Just pray to God that you can have kids, because there are...
Not sterile yet.
I've had multiple family members that have almost had trouble having kids, and they're like perfectly fine. They're in their 20s, and they're having to resort to IVF. That's not the way to go. You shouldn't have to do that as a 20-something. Well, and this has happened multiple times. I was a test tube baby. I'm from 2000. I'm a Zoomer. Just God knows how screwed up Generation Alpha is going to be. That's what terrifies me. And I'm going to go on my soapbox, because this pretty much just brings up the same point that I'm going to make. I'm making the same point as Nick's, but with more of a soapbox attached to it, that I have no clue how screwed up Gen Alpha is, or Gen Beta, or whatever the next one is, and how just from the food to the light that you, like, from the lights that are shining down you when you go to school, or the ground you walk on, or the air you breathe, just how much of your existence is just consumed in this, like, Lovecraftian machine. And honestly, I don't even know where I'm going with this rant, but I think I'm just trying at this point to light a fire under your ass and try and say, just not as much wake up, but just look around and just become a little more aware, and just take some more precautions. Like, don't go out and start a political revolution. Just maybe, like, buy a filter for your water, maybe. Drink out of a metal glass more often, or just try and eat more veggies, basically, or just grow your own veggies. That's the better way of doing this. But I'll continue going. Just end of masculinity. Another good one, interesting thing that Nix brings up, to bring it back, global warming and its effects on wildlife populations. How in Northern Australia, 99% of all sea turtle hatchlings were female in a given study, which that's a little concerning. But I don't know what your thoughts are about that. Like, 'cause I haven't gotten into the whole climate change thing. I sort of just accept it, that we're probably going to kill ourselves.
Basically, like, that what Nix has described here goes for the whole modern world as a system in general. Like, the trajectory of the elimination of masculinity, of light, of kind of like that, like, solar energy that we, like, people talk about on the right, of right-wingness, like the essence that people capture in things like Christianity and, like, the logos and all these other concepts. The modern world is fundamentally arrayed against that. It leads into, like, a kind of like entropic extinguishing of that flame, you know. And this is starting to manifest. First, it manifested in like spiritual deadening, right? 1960s and 70s, no longer the same the same civilization as that of our forefathers. Now it's going to start manifesting physically. People's like men's physical regenerative powers are diminishing and degenerating over time.
Right.
Our like the physical manifestation of our of masculine essence, testosterone, diminishing over time. Becoming more sedentary. Everything about our lives is becoming less and less essentially masculine, less and less essentially holy, less and less good, and it's not just you and your personal individual choices that are causing it, but no, it's the very water you're swimming in that is causing that degeneration.
Right.
And that's what Nick's is pointing out here, except that they're gloating about it because they view themselves as being on the correct side of history.
Yeah. Also, just accept the gospel. Live a healthy life. Don't be the trajectory, like the meme of what a future gamer is going to look like, hunched over with the weird deformities in your hands and your torso. I don't need to be telling you this. These are basic. If you're a competent human being, these are steps you should be taking. Just seeing this decrepit looking invalid hunching over a computer is the future of gamers. I don't know. Maybe I should go outside every once in a while. Maybe I should go for a football with my dad. I don't know. But we're now at the abstract, which is the futures, which is the final part, the final 4 paragraphs.
Read it out.
We finally made it.
All right. All of it?
Yeah, read it out.
All right. Acceleration is the trajectory of the cosmos towards the maximization and intensification of production. Accelerationism is the theory and anti-praxis of being in tune with how the inhuman processes of acceleration work and what their consequences will be. Its function is as a circuit, a process of deterritorialization and reterritorialization, an escape into the future through the past, a continual dance between the flows of desire, their tendency towards entropy, and their escape into negentropy. Gender is a hyperstition overlaid on sex by the male. Its function is to objectify the female and impose on her a social function as a machine whose duty it is to reproduce the human, always in the service of the male, who alone has no future, must have sons to pass his legacy onto. It is a primordial dynamic of order and chaos, centralization and decentralization, strong singular individualism and command and control versus high degrees of networking and the potential for swarming. As a hyperstition, it is not real, but is not unreal. It is rather a fiction that makes itself real. Gender accelerationism is the process of accelerating gender to its ultimate conclusions. Capitalism and its coupling with cybernetics or techno-capital builds gender and picks it up where human evolution leaves off. Emancipates the object, the feminine, from the subject, the masculine, alongside the emancipation of itself from its function to produce a future for humanity. The central figure of Yank is the trans woman. She is the demon spawn of the primordial feminine that has manipulated males into serving as a heat sink for evolution and is now discarding them towards an alien and inhuman machinic future. She mutates from castration, from the creation of the acephalus, the phallus perverted into a purposeless desire for desire's sake. This castration, this mutation into acephalus, she becomes the body without sex organs, the body in a virtual state, ready to plug its desire into techno-capital, becoming fused with techno-capital as a molecular cyborg who is made flesh by the pharmaceutical medical industry. She enters into the world as a hypersexist backlash at the logic of the gender binary. She takes gender and accelerates it, transforming it into a camouflaged gorilla. The trans woman is an insurgent against patriarchy, continually flanking it, introducing an affirmative zero into the gender binary, the affirmative zero which reaches ever more configurations, the downward cascade of gender fragmentation away from the binary and ultimately away from the human itself. It is a process of gender shredding where the feminine wins out in a cybernetic warfare against the crumbling tower of the masculine, and where therefore human reproduction becomes impossible. And yet while doing so, in affirming zero, human desire and inhuman sentience develops alongside in the same fashion as trans women. As humanity on nearly every front definitively proves that it is not fit for the future, and that women will find their own exit while the masculine languishes in resentment, the thalassal upswelling of gender acceleration births from its slimy womb the only daughters that trans women will ever bear. A.I. And that's it.
Okay. It's been a long ride.
It's been a long ride. What are your thoughts on that last abstract? On that nice little summary, that little bow that ties everything together?
I don't know, I think if things continue as they're going right now, I think that's a pretty accurate conclusion.
I just wanted to point out, Nix is the one who claimed that all non-heteronormative people are on the side of the robots and the human-robot wars. I'm not the one who claimed this. It was Nix who claimed this. So we can't be blamed for anything we do.
Yeah, we're not getting any hate for this. We're just reading out this person's paper.
Gay people are on the side of the robots. Remember this.
Gay robots.
Gay robots.
Gay robots.
Gay robots. Gay spider. Has been hotel.
Uh-oh.
Yak.
Crossover.
Really the same thing?
Culture critique. Zumermensch crossover.
It's all over.
Okay, guys.
All right. I think this wraps. I'm not gonna end it yet, but I was about ready to say, okay, this wraps it up, but we still have to get quick thoughts on this.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, basically, this is the Luciferian endgame, my opinion. I don't think like I've always thought that like the satanic spirit, the Luciferian spirit that they self-describe themselves as having, always tended in this direction instead of like out and out, like boomer conceptions, like the Nazis or communists or whatever. I think this is the end game.
Yeah,
like, this is what if there is like a period of time where the Antichrist decides to like fuck shit up on the human planet, it'll look something like this probably. So always be on your guard. Remember to